Hey, Sam here, and I know your day's crazy, but I've got a quick idea to take your stress from overwhelmed to under control. So let's tackle systems from the classroom to your living room, one simple step at a time. This is the Simple Systems with Sam podcast. Once upon a time, in a land called Italy, it's a real country, and this is a real story, there was a sociologist and economist named Pareto. I don't know how to pronounce his first name, so we're just going to stick with the last name. And what he determined is that 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population. And this doesn't seem to matter to anybody until he goes ahead and studies other countries and recognizes the same pattern, that 80% of the land is owned by 20% of the population. And then in 1989, the UN did a whole study, and 80% of the wealth in the world was owned by 20% of the population. So we see this number magically start to appear in lots and lots of different places. And so it's been adopted and called the Pareto Principle. And if you've been in any productivity like circles or read too many productivity books like I have, you've seen this before. If you've ever been in a management position, you know the Pareto Principle. But I wanted to share some little footnote thoughts that I have after we go through and explain it a little bit more in depth. Because I think that we need to take this idea and store it in our minds for whenever we are completing so many different tasks and we have just an overwhelming amount of stuff to do. But there's some tweaks we can make so that it's not just a business-minded principle, but it can work for you as a teacher, as a parent, as a partner, as a person, just trying to find balance. So let's talk a little bit more about what the actual Pareto Principle is. The Pareto Principle is saying that 20% of the effort that you put in results in 80% of the outcome. So let's say that you are working on a big task, a big project. You have a laundry list of things that you need to do. But in fact, the outcome of that project really lies in you completing the important 20%. 20% of that list will give you 80% of the results you've been looking for. And this is a statistically backed up number. Microsoft actually uses this idea when they go into debugging their software. You know when you get the pop-up on your computer because there's an issue and you say send report? Well, what they will do is they will only work on debugging the top 20% most frequent complaints. And what they found is by fixing those, in the long run, they clear out 80% of the bug reports that get sent their way. Because that 20% down the line fixed enough to remove the 80% of their workload. And even if you look at bigger businesses, like looking at Apple, which Microsoft and Apple in the same episode, I'm not talking about business all the time, I swear, but Apple has a wide range of products. Apple also follows the Pareto Principle, where you notice that 20% of Apple products actually bring in 80% of their revenue. Now, for Apple, it's shifted over time. You've had the iPod, you've had iTunes, you have now the iPhone, and I'd argue right now that AirPods are probably part of their vital few. They're 20% that bring in their biggest revenue, especially with how many are left in my classroom. I do not understand how kids keep getting new pairs after losing them all the time. So the first thing that we need to start doing and keeping in our mind is when you have a to-do list and you feel like it's just overwhelming, you need to look at the 20% of that list that is actually going to provide the biggest outcome towards whatever your goal is. If you look at your list and you had 10 things written on it, well, there's a really good chance that there are 2 things on that list that are going to provide 80% of an outcome that you need to work towards. Some of these tasks might be really small. Some of them can probably be avoided completely. If you need help controlling an out-of-control to-do list, I will link in the show notes to my 5 steps to simplify your to-do list. It's completely free, and trust me, I still reference it all the time. When I'm overwhelmed, I just rock through those 5 steps, and it cuts it down dramatically. But you still need to know what the last 20% are that are going to provide the outcome that you're looking for. So we need to start considering that when we're overwhelmed. We might have a million things we could do, but what are the important few things that we should do? Now, my next thought to tack onto this is really this misuse of a quote. And what people have turned it into is saying that you have the vital few, which is your 20%. The 20% of those tasks, those are vital. Those are the things that are going to push you far and beyond and over the edge, versus the trivial many. The trivial 80% of tasks that are really going to only move you 20% of the way. So that's not helpful as much. But if you rethink about this quote, it's actually the vital few, they're still vital, that 20% is still having a massive impact, versus the useful many. Those other 80% of tasks that we have on our list, the things that we want or should need to get done, those are still important. 20% of an outcome is still a huge step. And in fact, on the day-to-day basis, most of what you do falls into this useful many category. But what we need to do is we need to use systems, automation, delegation, and elimination to cut down on the impact of our day this 80% holds. There are things you have to do. You should be brushing your teeth. You should be paying your bills. Now, is that going to be part of your top 20% that gives you 80% of your outcome towards running a marathon? No, it's probably not. However, if you're not down for the count because you have to go get a cavity filled, that's helping a little bit, right? If you can go home and your lights are turned on because you paid your bills, that's still helping. It's still useful to do these things, but we need to take the time to figure out how this 80% of useful and necessary stuff can have the impact but reduced effort. And that's where a lot of these systems come into place. So when we're looking at the Pareto Principle, I think a lot of people can get really confused saying, oh, well, I only need to do 20% of the work. That's not true. Most of us are not giant corporations that can do that. We still have to complete 100% of the tasks, but we need to know which ones are worth more time and effort. That 80% is useful, but it's not an effective use of our time to focus on. And if we can free up this 80% by putting a system around it, and by knowing what is actually going to be shifted into that 20% of really impactful steps, then we can make huge strides. And that's what I hope all of the simple systems that we talk about in this podcast are going to give you. And we have 81 other episodes that you can turn to for so many simple systems. And we're going to continue going into it. Today's just going to be focused on this principle and this mindset shift. But the idea is that we're simplifying that 80% down. Another little footnote that I think about when I think about the Pareto Principle is that for a business, it's an entire business's focus to be in this 20%, to know what is going to provide them the biggest outcome, the biggest results financially. Now, unlike a major business where everybody can be focused on the exact same 20% for this 80% outcome, that's not really how our day-to-day life is going to work. We're all working for ourselves, but also towards a bigger goal. So we can use bigger teams to help distribute the workload for that goal. You can think about it this way. You have an entire school that has a goal, but then you also have the department. And your department might get a little bit more specific in how they are going to tackle that goal. But then you also have the team that you're working on for whatever course you're teaching. Now, I've been a department of one, and I've been a department of two where I was still the only person teaching the things that I was doing. But you still have a support system at school where you can share ideas and also delegate some tasks or pieces of the task out so that we can support each other. And I think that education and also parenthood is a very unique version of the Pareto Principle. Because in the business, everybody's focused on the same things. But at school, everybody might have the same big goals with the big outcomes, but we have different day-to-day tasks that we have to complete. And so while we're over here dealing with those useful many little tasks that need to get done, there are still the big vital few things that need to be tackled. But we can distribute the workload amongst people. We can share together. We can work together. We can split up and delegate tasks. It does not have to all rely on you. And before I wrap up this last little footnote that I want to make, let's just recap really quickly. The Pareto Principle is saying that 20% of the things that you do give you 80% of the biggest outcome and results. It's important to know what the 20% tasks are. It's important to also reduce the impact and the effort that go into the other 80% as much as you can, so you have the energy to dedicate to the important and vital few tasks. But also, in a school or home setting, you do not have to be the only one tackling those vital few tasks. You don't have to be the only one tackling the useful many either. We can delegate and stretch these tasks out so that they do not all fall on one person. But also, the last thing that I think is really important to note here, sometimes part of the vital few is just knowing when you need to refuel. Being able to have 80% of the outcome rest in 20% of your tasks, sometimes in the middle of a hectic semester, means that your vital few tasks are taking care of yourself so that you can recharge your battery, even if it's just to that 80% mark, so that you can continue to do everything else. And so while there have been a lot of numbers thrown around this entire episode, I think that it is important to keep the Pareto Principle in mind anytime that you feel like you're getting overwhelmed or you have a big project or big tasks coming up. Anytime a student is maybe overwhelmed with catching up on work, what 20% can they do to still get them 80% of the knowledge? If you're deciding to drop down to a capsule wardrobe, what 20% of your closet can you pick out for a capsule wardrobe that you already wear 80% of the time? Statistically, the Pareto Principle also tells us that we only use about 20% of the items that are in our house and that we use them more than 80% of the time. So if you want to look at it that way, you can also start reducing a lot of the things around you and you'd probably never notice. Now, the 80-20 rule doesn't have to apply to everything, but I think it's really refreshing to take a step back and realize that we don't have to do all of it at 100%. And the Pareto Principle also gives us a lot of really great understanding of figuring out what is actually important in our day. And while we might not always choose the correct vital few, having the useful many means that we're always doing something in the right direction. Until next time. Thanks for hanging out today. I hope that this simple step will help build big results in your classroom, home, and life. Remember to subscribe, review, and tag me on social media at Engineer Does Education so we can build a simple system together.